Make sure that you're spending your $365 the right way. These are going to be the best Parfums de Marly fragrances in my collection. It's been quite some time since I've reviewed some of these, and so I wanted to do an updated, the best PDM fragrances of all time, basically. The ones that are worth your money and maybe not so much worth your money. As of today, I have every PDM that I personally enjoy, and I've purchased every single one of these on a lot of discounters and retailers that you can see down in the description and potentially find these on one of those sites. Also, my fragrance AROMATIX is now available. Carnal Desire and Royal Taboo. One of the sexiest tobacco and cinnamon fragrances with cardamom. Not the black one, it's gonna be the red or the brown one. Called Royal Taboo, now shipping. So back to the PDM. Now we're just gonna go ahead and start with no order, but this one is Habdan. And Habdan is one of the least enjoyed fragrances for me and a little bit underwhelming. And the main reason that I purchased this fragrance is because it was on sale. I found it at a discounter for a relatively affordable fragrance, and it was at the time where I was just blind buying just for the sake of blind buying. I'm sure a lot of us have done that, and if you haven't, it's an obsession. Don't just start. At the time of picking this up, it was one of their earlier fragrances, and I didn't see too many crazy reviews about it or too many reviews about it in general, and it's more so just like this ambery saffron. It's also got caramel, some myrrh, and I thought it was pretty interesting, but once I got it, it did smell kind of like this old school style of DNA, one that I never really reached for. Something about the contrast with the apple and the resins just didn't really do it for me, and it ended up being one of, if not my least favorite in my collection, is Habdan. It just smells a little bit old school. It doesn't smell like anything I would personally want to wear, recommend, or any of that. So my personal rating for this one would be something of a 4, honestly, because 5 is something neutral and 4 would be something of just a dislike. Moving on to the next one is Parfums de Marly Perseus. This is one of their newest additions to their collection, and it smells like this very uplifting, bright citrus fragrance and a very hefty dose of vetiver. It smells like there's a contrasting, or there's a couple notes of grapefruit and vetiver, which them in themselves can kind of give accords of the similar thing. So it's pretty damn astringent, and that smells a bit bitter, basically. So that combination isn't really for everybody, but for me, I personally enjoy it a lot. And it reminds me of a lot of fragrances that smell like luxury hotels. A lot more notes to it, obviously. I think there's fir resin and also tonka bean to give it some sweetness, but I really enjoyed rocking this fragrance. The ambergris also makes this one last a pretty good amount of time, and it reminds me of other fragrances that do the whole citrus and vetiver combination, but a lot more vibrant and energetic for sure. So the whole terre de mes, except brighter and fresher and even more mass appealing, but stronger as well in its projection. So this isn't going to be for everybody. It definitely is going to appeal more so to people who already know they like that very dry and brittle style of woods. The stringency, the bitterness of grapefruit. In that sense, it's absolutely fantastic, but I wouldn't give it more than like an 8.25 just because it lacks the mass appeal, and it's not something that I could reach for all the time. But when I want to be transported into smelling like a luxury style of fragrance that reminds me of those hotels, I'll absolutely go for something like that. The total longevity for this fragrance will be anywhere from about 7 to 9 hours, so it is pretty performing for what it's doing. But aside from that, that's pretty much it. I didn't give much of a longevity for Habdan because honestly, it's not a fragrance that I enjoy at all for me to just dissect to that level. And even though it is a resin-based fragrance, I typically enjoy myrrh and tonka bean and those style of ambery fragrances. But even then, in that regard, this isn't something that I found to be a good resin fragrance at all, or a good amber fragrance at all, at least in my opinion. Moving on to the next one is Oajan. And as you guys can see, this is the older bottle and it's a phenomenal fragrance. This is all about this beautiful dose of cinnamon and woods. Very intensive in the cinnamon nature, at least it used to be intense. But over time, I've definitely become accustomed to more intense fragrances, and it kind of smells like normal. Once upon a time, it smelled like a hot tamale to me. Very intensive candy that's cinnamon based, and it does get a lot of compliments. And nowadays, it just kind of smells like a cinnamon fragrance. That's really crazy. What this is all about is going to be this warm, ambery cinnamon and honey combination. There's also other notes like vanilla, osmanthus, some earthy patchouli, and that's basically what it is. Very sexy, very spicy as well, and a warm, ambery, seductive date night style of fragrance. I would give this a rating of about an 8.5. I really enjoy it, but over time, I've realized that it's extremely hard to wear. Other than during the winter time, it really doesn't work because it's very rich and ambery and also very spiced. And the whole cinnamon vibe, psychologically, it doesn't really fit with summertime or even springtime. Fall and wintertime, sure. Moving on to the next one is a very intensive oud and woods fragrance, but super sexy. Saffron, oud, praline, woods, and very, very masculine. I have smelled some women pull this off, and it smells amazing. And it reminds me a lot of Inicio's Oud for Greatness, except with more hair on its chest. Very masculine, very intense, and very sexy. I think that this is one of their best fragrances, but it's not going to be for everybody because of that oriental and spiced saffron and oud combination. It's not animalic, it actually smells like a clean oud, very sophisticated and elevated, and it lasts eternally. This is a fragrance I would give like a solid 8.8 out of 10. I wouldn't give it any more than that because it's kind of also hard to wear, but it does make you smell regal, luxurious, and very elegant. elegant. I think that in contrast to Oud for Greatness, it does add another depth that gives it that masculinity vibe, the whole fur and the praline as well. The touch of sweetness and the addition of that very intensive wood. A great scent profile. It's not going to be for everybody, but if you like oud and saffron, you should definitely check Habdan out. It has to be one of their best ones. Layton Exclusif. Laotian oud, creamy, ambery, with that original geranium style DNA you'll get in the original. This is sexy. It's ambery. It's creamy, woody, slightly animalistic, but it's not better than the original. This takes the original and makes it more date night appropriate. It still has that mentholated and sweet vanilla vibe underneath everything, but it's still all enveloped in those creamy woods. An aphrodisiac, if you will. It does have an animalic vibe to it that might turn some people off, but it is very, very mild in that. And if anything, it just adds a little bite to it. It's this creamy woods, geranium and vanilla and apple style of DNA that I think is so sexy. The addition of some of those ambers does make it more appropriate for dates, but it's still not better than the original. The original has a bit more of a vibrancy that we'll get into when we'll talk about that one. So with that being said, I would not give this more than like an 8. I would not give it more than an 8. I do enjoy Oajan more. I do enjoy Habdan a bit more, but for whatever it's worth, it does take that style of geranium apple DNA and make it a little bit sexier with an aphrodisiac vibe. Moving on to one of the sexiest tobacco fragrances in the game is Parfums de Marly Herod. And Herod is probably DNA-wise one of the sexiest. All about the tobacco and cinnamon combination with the addition of vetiver. There's also vanilla, incense, osmanthus. There's a plethora of notes, except what the biggest issue with this fragrance is gonna be the performance, which is atrocious. It's damn shame. And at this price point, I personally would never buy it again just because of the performance. And I would not recommend this just because of the performance, at least in my experience. I've sprayed this one over 8 to 12 times and I've never gotten any type of performance more than about 4 to 5 hours, if that. And even then, the projection on this one is really not that good. So with that being said, they did also reformulate, and I think they even toned down the concentration even more so, and that just gives me less reason to. I have smelled a few fragrances that are better, and in fact, Royal Taboo, my fragrance that I release that you can get at jomashop.com right now, is a stronger, more projecting, and longer lasting tobacco fragrance that also has cinnamon, also has cardamom. It doesn't smell like this per se, but I'm just giving the contrast as to why I think that this one should have been better, much better in its performance. Still a great fragrance, but the performance makes it just sink and tank in its ratings. I give this one no more than a 6.5, and I would not recommend purchasing it just because of the performance. Because after all, if you can't even smell it after 1 hour, did you even, like, are you even wearing a fragrance? And that's the case with this one for me. It's like 1 to 2 hours and it's gone. So nothing more to say. Scent profile, phenomenal. I would not buy it again, and I would not personally recommend that anybody buys it, honestly. Moving on to the next one is Carlisle. Carlisle is a super sexy take on patchouli, apple, and tonka bean. Sophisticated, masculine, earthy, but also clean. It smells like money. It smells like a man who's got his shit together. It's quite similar to how Habdan's vibes are all about. It doesn't smell anything like Habdan, but just the overall achievement, except Carlisle goes more mysterious, seductive, and even more tame in its projection and its performance. It still projects and performs, but what you smell in the air is less intrusive. It's less offensive, if you will, because it doesn't have any spiced saffron or anything like that. Sexy scent profile that's mellow, that's reserved, and very confident, and for that reason deserves a score of a freaking 9 to 5. It is going to be something for more so people who are, you know, a little bit older, masculine, and got their shit together, because that's quite literally what it smells like. Moving on to the next one is PDM's Althair. Orange blossom, vanilla, ambroxan, and cinnamon. Pretty easy scent profile to enjoy. It smells really good, very mass appealing, and a compliment galore. This is absolutely insane when it comes to the compliment. It has to be one of the most mass appealing scent profiles from PDM. I would have imagined that Perseus would have been, but even then, I don't think it will be as mass appealing as Althair. Decent in terms of its versatility. You can wear it a lot of seasons, but I do find that it has a suffocating style of orange flower that if you wear it in too much heat, it can come off suffocating like that. With that being said, in the appropriate seasons of the fall and the winter, and even during the earlier spring, it'll do phenomenally. It projects, performs, it lasts pretty much the entire day. And even though something like Althair comes at a 9 and it's a higher score than Perseus, this doesn't take away the enjoyment factor for Perseus, but I factor in a lot of ratings, a lot of things like versatility, performance, bang for buck, compliment factor, etc. And overall, the scores are true to exactly that. In my experience, this has always been a more complimented, a longer lasting, and a more enjoyable wearing in general. With that being said, Althair is definitely deserving of a 9 to a 9.5. I kind of want to say a 9.5 because I do enjoy wearing it a little bit more than Carlisle, considering the fact that I can wear it more than Carlisle. So with that being said, I think it's only fair we actually rate it at a 9.5. Still not that versatile, and you can potentially get away with it during the summer. You have to be low on the trigger. Next one, Sedley. Thirst quenching, a little bit of this sugary, crunchy quality coming from some of the aromatics. It's got bergamot, it's got citron, that's this very intensive lemon style of DNA. It's also got grapefruit, mandarin, lemon, spearmint, and the geranium with rosemary. Slightly minty, very crisp, energetic. It smells fantastic. I love the scent profile of Sedley. I just don't love its performance. So I've never gotten more than about 5 hours with Sedley, 5 to 5.5, maybe 6 tops. And it does transition pretty significantly from that initial thirst quenching, crunchy, and like, you know, all of that beautiful stuff that I was talking about. It transitions into a much more aromatic and woodsy scent profile relatively quickly. As it starts to dry down, you get more of those aromatics, some patchouli, some sandalwood, and even cedarwood, and those citruses kind of die down relatively quickly within the first hour to 2 hours. The opening is to die for. Freaking love it. The performance, it's also not really something that I would personally pay $365 for, but I will say that the scent profile is what I would pay the $365 for. So I still think it's really good. You just have to be realistic with your expectations, knowing that it doesn't last that long. It's not going to give you more than about 6 hours if you spray it on a good 8 times, and that's how many times I've sprayed it. I even sprayed it up to 12 times. I've managed to squeeze maybe 6.5 hours, with most of it being that mid to dry down of the geranium, the aromatic rosemary, which is herbal basically, and some of those wood. Overall score for this one, I want to give it a solid 8. It smells great. It's very refreshing and energetic even. It puts me in a good mood. It's just the performance is something that I really wish was better. Even with that being said, it still got an 8, so that does count for a lot. Last but not least, Layton, the #1 PDM fragrance of all time. For a long time, and still to this day. It's apple, lavender, geranium, there's cardamom, super sexy spice, really crisp and cooling coming from that geranium, slightly mentholated, but back with a hefty dose of vanilla that kind of coats that whole mentholated vibe, and super sexy. This one starts off relatively fresh, invigorating, coming from all that citrus at the top, along with this crisp apple that starts to warm up into this more ambery, woodsy, and vanilla fragrance. Very sexy. I get apple pie vibe without it going too much into like the Christmassy date night style of DNA. That can also be worn into date night, but it's not like this gourmand scent. Very sexy, multi-layered fragrance that has masculine traits and classic traits like this barbershop-y style DNA coming from this lavender, the geranium, and then also a lot of modern factors and very intensive style of crisp green apple, and just a very overall intensive scent profile that's compliment worthy, that's projecting, and long lasting. This will last the entire day. It'll also get compliments because it's different, it's head turning. That crisp green apple really does get a lot of attention, drying down into something that's sexy coming from that vanilla and cardamom spice, and just overall the best experience from any scent profile I've gotten from any PDM. Overall, my most complimented, my longest lasting, and most unique and exotic from Parfums de Marly. Habdan, I would argue and say, is pretty damn exotic as well, but this one you can actually wear more often than people give it credit for. I've worn it in every single season. I've just sprayed it a little bit less during the warmer weather. So during the summertime, I wouldn't spray it more than about 4 to 6 times, and then I would go up to 12 times during every other season. Aside from that, the most exotic, the most long lasting, and the best scent profile from PDM. Overall rating for Layton is a 10. So there you have it. Before you go out there and purchase your next PDM, these are the best PDMs ranked and scored. My name's Neeb. Thank you for tuning back in Aromatics, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.